The howling wind carried Katherine Zimmer's desperate prayers across the desolate Wyoming landscape as she clutched her thin shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. The blizzard had come without warning, transforming the late November afternoon of 1882 into a white nightmare as she huddled beside the broken wagon wheel that had sealed her fate. Her husband's grave was barely 3 months old, and now she faced the very real possibility of joining him in death's cold embrace. Katherine had been making her way to the nearby town of Riverdale, hoping to sell the remaining possessions that wouldn't fit in her trunk, before catching the eastbound train back to her sister's home in Pennsylvania. The journey should have taken less than a day, but the sudden snowstorm and the wagon's collapse had left her stranded miles from any settlement, with night rapidly approaching. The temperature plummeted as darkness fell. Katherine's fingers had long since lost feeling, and her tears froze against her cheeks. She thought of her sister Martha, who would never know what became of her. She thought of Thomas, her late husband, whose dream of Western prosperity had ended with a miner's pickaxe to his skull during a claim dispute. Now, it seemed, the unforgiving West would claim her too. Through the curtain of swirling snow, Katherine caught a glimpse of movement. Perhaps death itself coming to collect her frozen soul. She closed her eyes, ready to surrender to the inevitable. "Madam? Madam, can you hear me?" The voice seemed to come from miles away, muffled by the storm and her own fading consciousness. A large figure loomed over her, and Katherine felt strong arms lifting her from the snow. "Stay with me now. My cabin's not far." Katherine tried to respond, but her lips were too numb to form words. She felt herself being hoisted onto a horse, a strong arm holding her securely as they moved through the blizzard. The man spoke steadily to her as they rode, his deep voice cutting through the wind. "Name's Bryce Rawlins. Got a place just over that ridge. You'll be warm soon enough, madam." Katherine drifted in and out of awareness, vaguely registering the slowing of the horse, the dismount, being carried in powerful arms through a doorway, and finally the blessed sensation of heat. She was placed on something soft to bed, she realized, and rough but gentle hands removed her snow-caked boots and outer garments. "Can't let you keep these wet things on," the voice explained matter-of-factly. "I'll build up the fire and get you some broth when you're ready." Katherine managed to open her eyes at last, focusing on her savior as he moved efficiently around the small one-room cabin. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a beard that couldn't hide his youth, perhaps 30 at most. His movements were purposeful but unhurried as he stoked the fire, hung her wet clothes to dry, and put a pot on the stove. "Thank you," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Bryce Rawlins turned, relief evident in his eyes deep blue, she noticed, like the Wyoming sky on a clear summer day. "Thought I might have found you too late. What's your name, madam?" Katherine Zimmer." "Well, Mrs. Zimmer, you've had a close call. Blizzard like this, not many survive a night out in it." "How did you find me?" Katherine asked, pulling the rough woolen blanket closer around her shoulders. "Was bringing the cattle in closer to the barn when I spotted something by the trail. Providence, I reckon." He poured steaming broth into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Can you hold this?" Katherine's hands trembled, but she managed to take the cup. The broth was simple, just beef and onions, but it felt like the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted as it spread warmth through her body. "I'm headed to Riverdale," she explained between sips. "Or I was until my wagon broke down." Bryce nodded, pulling a chair closer to the bed but maintaining a respectful distance. "Not going anywhere tonight, that's certain. Storm set in good and proper. Might be days before the trail's clear enough." The reality of her situation gradually dawned on Katherine. She was alone in a cabin with a man she didn't know, miles from anywhere, with no immediate prospect of departure. Under different circumstances, the impropriety would have been scandalous, but survival had a way of redefining propriety. "I don't wish to impose," she began carefully. Bryce waved away her concern. "Madam, there's no imposition in saving a life. Besides, my mother raised me proper." You'll have the bed, I'll take the floor by the fire. Come morning, we'll figure what's next. True to his word, Bryce made himself a pallet near the hearth after ensuring Katherine was comfortable. The last thing she remembered before drifting into exhausted sleep was the sight of her rescuer silhouetted against the firelight, his broad shoulders rising and falling with each steady breath. Katherine awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, the unfamiliar cabin swimming into focus as memories of the previous night returned. Bryce was at the stove, his back to her, as he tended the breakfast. Outside, the world was a pristine white canvas, sunlight glinting off snow piled high against the windows. "Storms passed," Bryce said without turning, somehow sensing she was awake. "But we've got near 4 feet of snow. Trail to town won't be passable for a spell." Katherine sat up slowly, aware that she wore only her chemise and petticoat beneath the blankets. "My clothes," dried him best I could. He nodded toward a chair where her dress, stockings, and shawl were neatly folded. "I'll step outside while you dress. Take your time." Once alone, Katherine moved quickly, grateful for the privacy. Her clothes smelled of wood smoke but were indeed dry. After making herself presentable, she took a moment to survey the cabin. It was small but tidy, with a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, a single bed, and shelves holding provisions and a few books. A man's cabin, but not an uncivilized one. When Bryce returned, stamping snow from his boots, he brought with him a blast of cold air and an armful of firewood. Katherine noticed for the first time how handsome he was beneath the ruggedness, strong jawline, clear eyes, and a mouth that seemed ready to smile despite its serious set. "Feeling better this morning?" he asked, dropping the wood beside the stove. "Much. I'm in your debt, Mr. Rawlins. Bryce, please." He gestured to the table where he'd set out breakfast. "Hope you don't mind simple fare." Over bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee, Katherine learned that Bryce had come west from Missouri 5 years earlier. He'd built the cabin himself and ran a modest herd of cattle on the surrounding land. He was unmarried, never found the time, he explained with a shrug, and his nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. "And you, Mrs. Zimmer, what brings a lady alone to these parts?" His tone was conversational, not prying. Katherine hesitated, then decided that the man who had saved her life deserved her honesty. "I'm a widow. My husband Thomas and I came west for opportunity like so many others. He took work in the mines while saving for his own claim." She paused, the familiar ache of loss rising in her throat. "He was killed in August. A dispute over boundaries." Bryce's face darkened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Seems the promise of gold brings out the worst in men." "Yes," Katherine agreed softly. "After settling his affairs, I found there was little left. I'm returning east to my sister's home in Pennsylvania. Giving up on the West, then—" "The West took everything from me, Mr. Rawlins. There's nothing left to give up." Bryce nodded, accepting her bitterness without judgment. "Reckon that's fair. This country demands much and promises no guarantees." The day passed quietly. Bryce went out to tend his livestock while Katherine, insisting on earning her keep, tidied the cabin and prepared a stew from provisions he'd indicated she was welcome to use. By unspoken agreement, they established a routine that respected each other's privacy within the confines of the small space. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Bryce pulled a worn book from a shelf. "Hope you don't mind. Reading passes the time on winter nights." "What book?" Katherine asked, curious about this cowboy who apparently valued literature. "Wordsworth, poetry." He looked almost embarrassed. "My mother was a schoolteacher." Katherine smiled, genuinely surprised. "My father taught English. I grew up with Wordsworth, Shelley, and Byron as companions." Something shifted between them, then a recognition of unexpected common ground. When Bryce offered to read aloud, Katherine settled back in her chair, allowing the rich cadence of his voice to carry her through tales of daffodils and solitary clouds. Days passed, blending into a strange domestic harmony. The snow remained deep, but Bryce managed to reach Katherine's abandoned wagon, retrieving her trunk and confirming that the vehicle was beyond immediate repair. He brought word from his neighbor, who had made it to Riverdale and back, that the pass to town might not clear for another week or more. "I hope I'm not keeping you from important work," Katherine said one evening, watching Bryce whittling by the fire. "Winter's mostly waiting time on a ranch this size," he replied, his knife moving steadily through the pine wood. "Cattle need feeding and checking, but there's not much else to do but endure till spring." "And do you endure it well, the solitude?" Bryce paused, considering. "Most times. Though I'll admit, having company these past days has been pleasant." Katherine felt a warmth in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. She busied herself with mending a tear in her dress, acutely aware of his gaze. "You're good with your hands," she commented, nodding toward the small wolf taking shape beneath his knife. "Self-taught necessity, mostly." He turned the carving, examining it critically. "Though this is just for passing time, my father carved. Suppose I picked it up from him." "He taught you ranching as well, some." "He died when I was 17, finished learning on my own, working other men's land until I could afford my own." He set the carving aside. "What will you do in Pennsylvania?" Katherine sighed. "My sister's husband owns a dry goods store. They've offered me a place to stay and work until until I decide what comes next." "And what do you want to come next?" The question caught her off guard. Since Thomas's death, she'd thought only of survival, of putting one foot before the other. Want seemed a luxury she could ill afford. "I haven't allowed myself to want anything," she admitted. "It seemed safer that way." Bryce nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The heart's a stubborn thing, though, keeps wanting even when the head says not to." That night, Katherine lay awake longer than usual, pondering his words and the strange comfort she'd found in this isolated cabin with a man who read poetry and carved woodland creatures by firelight. On the 10th day of her stay, Bryce announced that the trail to town was finally passable. "We could make Riverdale by nightfall if we start early," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Train comes through on Thursdays." Katherine felt an unexpected hollowness at the news. "Yes, of course, I've imposed on your hospitality far too long already." "No imposition," Bryce said quickly. "Been nice having someone to talk to besides the cattle." They spent the evening in preparation, Katherine packing her trunk, Bryce readying the sled he'd built to transport it. There was a tension between them that hadn't existed before, a sense of something unfinished, unsaid. As Katherine folded her last dress into the trunk, Bryce cleared his throat. "Mrs. Zimmer, Katherine, before tomorrow there's something I'd like to say." She turned, finding him standing awkwardly by the table, the wolf carving in his hand. "Yes. I know you're set on leaving, and I respect that, but these days here, they've been—" He struggled, a man unused to expressing such thoughts. "What I mean to say is, I'd be honored if you'd consider staying, not just for the winter but, well, for longer." Katherine stared at him, her heart suddenly racing. "Mr. Rawlins, Bryce," he corrected softly. "Bryce, I hardly know you. I know, it's too soon and probably foolish of me." He extended the carved wolf. "This is yours, regardless, a remembrance if nothing else." Katherine took the carving, its weight solid in her palm. The craftsmanship was beautiful, the wolf's features detailed and expressive. "Thank you." That night, sleep eluded her entirely. She thought of Pennsylvania, of her sister's cramped home, and the pitying glances she would receive as the widowed relation. She thought of the store where she would work, measuring fabric and counting change day after monotonous day. And she thought of Bryce Rawlins, a man who had carried her from certain death into the warmth of his home and perhaps into something more. Morning came with leaden skies promising more snow. As they prepared the horse and sled, flakes began to fall, light at first, then with increasing urgency. "Weather's turning again," Bryce observed, helping Katherine onto the sled before climbing up beside her. "Still want to try for town?" Katherine looked at the gathering storm, then at the man beside her, solid, dependable, unexpectedly tender. In that moment, the choice crystallized with surprising clarity. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think I do." Bryce's head turned sharply toward her. "Katherine, I've been running away," she explained, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes. "From grief, from the West, from the possibility of caring for someone again." She took a deep breath. "I'm tired of running. If your offer stands, I'd like to stay, at least for a while." The smile that transformed Bryce's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Without a word, he turned the horse back toward the cabin, toward home. The winter of 1882 proved to be one of the harshest in Wyoming history, but within the walls of the small cabin, Katherine and Bryce discovered a growing warmth that defied the elements. They established a routine, he tending the livestock, she managing the domestic sphere, both reading poetry by firelight in the evenings. Katherine learned about cattle ranching, about surviving in a landscape that could be as brutal as it was beautiful. Bryce learned about the simple pleasures of coming home to a well-cooked meal and companionship after a day's hard work. They shared stories of their pasts, hopes for their futures, and gradually, the distance between them, both physical and emotional, diminished. By February, when Bryce's neighbor Jacob Miller made his monthly visit with mail and supplies, the sleeping arrangement had changed. No longer did Bryce make his bed by the fire. Now he shared the bed with Katherine, his wife of 3 weeks, married by a traveling preacher who had stopped by during a brief thaw in January. "Never thought I'd see the day," Jacob commented with a grin, accepting a cup of coffee from Katherine. "Bryce Rawlins, confirmed bachelor with a missus." "Life has a way of surprising us all," Bryce replied, his hand finding Katherine's beneath the table. That night, with snow once again blanketing the landscape, they lay entwined beneath warm quilts, Katherine's head resting on her husband's chest. "Any regrets?" Bryce asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "About staying?" "None." Katherine propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Though I do wonder sometimes if I'm cut out for ranch life. I know so little compared to you." "You've learned more in 2 months than most do in a year," he assured her. "Besides, we figure it out together. That's what partnership means." Katherine smiled, leaning down to kiss him. "Yes, I suppose it is." Spring arrived with a suddenness that transformed the landscape overnight, it seemed. Fields that had been snow-covered for months erupted in wildflowers, and the cabin, with windows flung open to the fresh air, felt larger, brighter. Katherine planted a garden while Bryce repaired fences damaged during winter storms. On a particularly fine April morning, Katherine found herself feeling unusually tired. She had been working in the garden since sunrise but had accomplished little, needing to rest frequently. "Perhaps you've been pushing yourself too hard," Bryce suggested when he returned for the midday meal and found her sitting on the cabin steps, looking pale. "Perhaps," she agreed, though a suspicion was forming in her mind, one that was confirmed 2 weeks later when the symptoms persisted. She chose a Sunday evening to tell him, after they'd enjoyed a special supper to celebrate the successful spring calving. Bryce was relaxed, content with the season's progress and the previous day's successful sale of 3 yearlings in town. "I have news," Katherine said, placing her hand over his on the table. "Come autumn, there will be 3 of us in this cabin." Bryce's expression shifted from confusion to wonder as understanding dawned. "You're certain?" Katherine nodded, her eyes filling with happy tears. "As certain as one can be without a doctor's confirmation." In a swift movement, Bryce was out of his chair and lifting Katherine into an embrace that spun her around the cabin. His laughter, rich and uninhibited, filled the space, and Katherine felt a joy so complete it nearly overwhelmed her. How different this moment was from when she had told Thomas about their expected child, a child lost in the early months, amid stress and poor nutrition. "We'll need to expand the cabin," Bryce declared, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "Add a proper bedroom, a nursery." "There's time," Katherine assured him, touched by his enthusiasm. "The baby won't arrive until October." Throughout the summer, as Catherine's body changed with the growing life inside her, Bryce worked tirelessly on the cabin addition. Neighbors from miles around came to help with the construction, a tradition of the frontier that ensured community survival. Katherine was moved by their generosity, these people who had welcomed her as one of their own. Emma Miller, Jacob's wife, became a particular friend, visiting often to check on Katherine's progress and share wisdom from her own experience as a mother of 4. Ranch life's hard on women, Emma admitted during one visit in August as they sat shelling peas in the shade of a cottonwood tree. But there's a richness to it too, a purpose that goes beyond society's trivial concerns. Katherine nodded, understanding. In Philadelphia, my days were filled with visiting and being visited, with discussions of fashion and gossip. Here, everything I do matters. And Bryce, he treats you well. Emma's direct question was asked with the frankness of frontier women who had no time for delicacy when survival was at stake. Better than I could have imagined, Katherine replied honestly. He's kind, considerate. We disagree at times, of course, but he listens. Truly listens. Emma smiled, satisfied. Good. I told Jacob after meeting you last winter that you'd be good for Bryce. Too long alone, that man was. Needed someone to remind him life's for living, not just working. By September, the cabin addition was complete, a proper bedroom for them and a small nursery adjacent, with a window facing east to catch the morning light. Bryce had even built a cradle, more elaborate than the simple functional furniture that filled the rest of their home. It's beautiful, Katherine marveled, running her hand over the smooth wood. Where did you learn such craftsmanship? Been planning it in my head for years, Bryce admitted. Even before I met you, I hoped someday to have cause to build it. On a crisp October morning, with golden aspen leaves dancing in the breeze, Katherine's labor began. Bryce rode for Emma Miller, returning with her just as things were intensifying. For 16 hours, Katherine labored, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Bryce remained by her side throughout, his steady presence an anchor in the storm of pain and effort. When their daughter finally arrived, her lusty cries filled the cabin as Bryce held Katherine's exhausted body close, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. She's perfect, he whispered as Emma placed the swaddled infant in Katherine's arms. Just like her mother. They named her Elizabeth Marie Rawlins after their respective mothers. She had Bryce's blue eyes and a tuft of dark hair that Katherine was certain would curl like her own. That winter was as harsh as the previous one, but the expanded cabin was warm and secure. On the coldest nights, the family of 3 would gather in the main room, Bryce reading aloud from Wordsworth or one of the new books Katherine had ordered from the catalog, while Elizabeth slept peacefully nearby. Hard to believe it's been just over a year, Katherine remarked one evening in late November, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. Since you found me. Bryce set down his book, coming to stand behind her at the window. His arms encircled her waist, and she leaned back against his solid warmth. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I'd decided to bring the cattle in an hour earlier or later that day, he said quietly. How close we came to never knowing each other. Katherine turned in his embrace to face him. I used to believe the West had taken everything from me. Now I see it gave me everything instead. Bryce kissed her then, a kiss filled with tenderness and promise. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in hushed white, but within the cabin's walls, the warmth of family and love created a sanctuary against winter's chill. 5 years later, the Rawlins ranch had prospered and expanded. Bryce had purchased additional acreage and increased his herd substantially. The cabin, too, had grown, with another bedroom added for young William Thomas Rawlins, who had joined the family 2 years after Elizabeth. On the anniversary of the day Bryce had found Katherine in the snow, they established a tradition of reminiscing about their unlikely beginning while sharing a special meal. This year, as they sat at the larger table in their expanded home, 7-year-old Elizabeth asked the question that prompted the annual retelling. "Tell again how you found Mama, Papa." Bryce exchanged a smile with Katherine across the table. "Well, Princess, it was the worst blizzard these parts had seen in 20 years. I was bringing the cattle closer to the barn when something caught my eye through the snow." Katherine watched her husband as he told the story, his voice painting images for their children of desperate circumstances and providential timing. His hair had a few strands of silver now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he was still the same steadfast man who had carried her from certain death into a life more fulfilling than she could have imagined. Later, after the children were asleep, Katherine and Bryce stood on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket against the evening chill. The stars spread across the Wyoming sky in breathtaking profusion, a sight that still awed Katherine even after years on the frontier. "I received a letter from Martha today," Katherine said, referring to her sister in Pennsylvania. "She's still trying to convince me to visit. We could go in the spring," Bryce suggested. "Show the children where their mama comes from." Katherine considered this. "Perhaps. Though I suspect they'd find Philadelphia rather tame after growing up with all this." She gestured to the vast landscape before them where their land stretched toward distant mountains. "Do you ever miss it? City life, civilization?" It was a question Bryce still asked occasionally, as if assuring himself that she was truly content with the choice she had made. Katherine turned to face him, cupping his bearded cheek with her hand. "Not for a moment. This is where I belong with you, with our children. This is home." Bryce covered her hand with his own, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "When I found you in that snow, I had no idea I was finding my whole future. And when you carried me into this cabin," Katherine replied softly, "you carried me into your heart as well." Their kiss, warmed by years of shared joy and hardship, sealed a love born in desperate circumstances but nurtured by choice and commitment. Behind them, the cabin windows glowed with welcoming light, a beacon of home and family in the vast Wyoming wilderness. And as snow began to fall once more, Katherine Zimmer Rawlins offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the storm that had changed the course of her life and led her to this man, this place, this perfect belonging.